international relations. Realism in international relations is a theoretical framework that emphasizes the role of power, state sovereignty, and the analytic nature of the international system. It argues that states act primarily in their own national interests, seeking security and survival, often through the accumulation of power. Realism views international relations as driven by the international system is arranged. There is no overriding authority above state, leading to a self-help system where the state must ensure their survival and security. Next is states are the primary actor. States are seen as a rational utility actor that pursues their national interests, primarily focusing on their power. Power is a central. Power often measured in the term of a military and economic capability is the primary means through which a state achieves their goal and protect themselves. Next is a conflict is inevitable due to a competition for the resources, mistrust, and the pursuit of power. Conflict and competition are seen as inherent in international relations. Next, the last one is morality and ideal are secondary. Realism downplays the role of morality. International law and institutions argue and state prioritize their national interests over ethical consideration.
Thucydides, the ancient Greek historian, analyzed power in the history of the Peloponnesian War by highlighting fear, honor, and self-interest as key drivers of state behavior. He described international politics as anarchic, with no central authority as seen in his Million Dialogue, where the strong dominate the weak, a dynamic echoed in United States and China tensions today. His concept of the Thucydides trap warns the rising power challenging established one often lead to conflict, as with Athens and Sparta. Thucydides' ideas remain crucial for understanding power struggles and security challenges in today's world. Niccolò Machiavelli, a Renaissance philosopher, wrote The Prince in 1513, advocating for practical governance and prioritizing state stability over morality. He emphasized that the ends justified the means, urging leaders to act decisively, even ruthlessly, to maintain power, a principle seen in real politics today, such as Russia's focus on national interests. Machiavelli's pragmatic approach to leadership remains relevant, highlighting the tough decisions required to ensure stability and effective governance. Thomas Hobbes, an English philosopher, introduced the state of nature, where the absence of authority leads to fear and conflict, the key to understanding power and security in international politics. He described a self-help system where states prioritize survival, driving arms races and distrust, as seen in the Cold War and the North Korean nuclear ambitions. Hobbes' insights into anarchy and security remain vital for explaining global arms races, alliances, and strategies in modern international relations. Hans Morgenthau, the father of the modern realism, argued that politics is governed by objective laws rooted in human nature. His book Politics Among Nations established classical realism. He emphasized power and national interest over morality, showing how states prioritize security and influence, as seen in the United States invasion of Iraq in 2003. Morgenthau principles remain essential for analyzing global conflicts, alliances, and strategies shaped by power dynamics.
The classical realism theory 1 on human nature posits that the action of nations in international relations mirror the intrinsic traits of humanity. Classical realists assert that people are intrinsically selfish, power-seeking, and motivated by a desire for dominance over others. The cynical perspective on human nature is applied to states, which function as collective entities reflecting these characteristics on a broader scale. An example like World War II in between 1939 to 1945. Classical realists often point to the action of Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan during World War II as an examples of states pursuing power and domination, driven by leaders' ambitions and insecurity reflective of human nature. The quest for power is an inherent aspect of human nature and a core characteristic of international politics. States pursue power to ensure their existence, assert influence, and uphold their sovereignty under an anarchic international order. This emphasis on power offers a distinct framework for comprehending disputes and competitiveness, yet detractors contend that it neglects the possibilities for collaboration and the impact of non-state players in modern global politics. For example, like China's rise in the 21st century. China's efforts to increase its economic, military, and technology power reflects its desire to assert itself as a global superpower. Initiatives like the Belt and Road Initiative (BRI) exemplify this strategy. On the state as the primary actor posits that states are the paramount and preeminent actors in international affairs. This perspective posits that state behavior is influenced by human nature and the quest of power and survival within an anarchic international system. Non-state players, including international organizations, multinational enterprises, and NGOs, are seen as secondary and lack of the sovereignty or ability to successfully influence the global order. For instance, in the Cold War between 1947 till 1991, the United States and the Soviet Union, as the two dominant state actors, shaped the global political landscape, competing for power and influence. International organizations like the United Nations played a peripheral role in major decisions and conflicts. Anarchy in the international system emphasizes the lack of a central ruling power over sovereign states. The absence of a central authority fosters an anarchic international landscape, compelling nations to depend on self-help to safeguard their interests, ensure survival, and address challenges. In classical realism, the anarchic framework is essential for comprehending state behavior and the inevitability of conflict. For example, in nuclear arms race. In the absence of a global enforcer, states like the US, Russia, China, and the others have pursued nuclear weapons to deter threats and ensure their security. This is a direct result of a self-help dynamic in anarchic system. In classical realism, the national interest serves as the fundamental principle of a state, primarily focused on power and security. States operate pragmatically to secure their existence and sovereignty, often overlooking ethical issues. This emphasis on national interests elucidates why nations prioritize self-preservation and power within an anarchic international system. Yet, it is sometimes criticized for neglecting for significance of international rules collaboration, and global interconnectedness. For example, U.S. containment policy during the Cold War. The United States pursued a strategy to contain the spread of Soviet influence and communism, driven by its national interest to maintain global dominance and prevent the Soviet Union from becoming more powerful. Realism views war as an unavoidable consequence of the anarchic international system and the inherent power-driven disposition of humanity. States pursuing their self-interest often compete for power, security, and resources. This viewpoint provides a persuasive rationale for historical and modern wars. Nevertheless, detractors contend that it diminishes the capacity for collaboration and the influence of international institutions in alleviating conflict. India-Pakistan conflict, for instance. The ongoing disputes between India and Pakistan over Kashmir highlight how historical rivalries, competing national interests, and mutual distrust make conflict a recurring feature in their relationship. The balance of power posits that states under an anarchic international order endeavor to inhibit any single state from attaining excessive power. This notion posits that when a state accumulates excessive power, it endangers the security and sovereignty of other nations, leading them to form alliances or undertake measures to counteract this dominance. The balance of power is seen as a system that sustains stability and inhibits dominations or unrestrained aggressiveness by any one entity. For example, the concept of Euro 1815 till 1914. After the Napoleonic Wars, the major European powers like Britain, France, Russia, Austria, and Prussia worked to maintain a balance of power through diplomacy and military alliances. This system prevented any one country from becoming dominant and led to a relatively stable international order until World War I.
I will present two key factors in realist theories too, which is the security dilemma and the emphasis on military capability, which explain much of state behavior in international relations. The first factor is the security dilemma. It explains effort by one state to boost security often make others feel less secure, leading to arms races and tension. The implication, even peaceful intention can create conflict. For example, the Cold War arms race between the US and USSR stemmed from mutual fear, not aggression. The second factor is the emphasis on military capability. It explains military power is seen as the ultimate tool for securing national interests. The implication, states heavily invest in defense and may use force to achieve their goals. For example, the US prioritizes military spending to maintain global dominance. In conclusion, the security dilemma stresses the need for trust and communication, and the military capability focus reminds us to balance defense with diplomacy.
State sovereignty and centrality. Realism underscores the centrality of sovereign states, positioning them as the primary actors in international politics. This perspective emerged prominently from the Westphalian system in 1648, which established the principle of a sovereignty. A contemporary example is the America First policy under President of Donald Trump, emphasizing national interest over multilateral commitments. states act rationally to prioritize sovereignty and compete in a system where survival is paramount. Anarchy and the self-help system. In realism, the international system anarchic nature compels states to rely on self-help mechanisms. Without a central authority to ensure security, states prioritize building their capabilities. For instance, North Korea's nuclear program exemplifies its self-help dynamic, developed to deter external threats. This anarchic structure forces states to independently secure their survival and interests. Power and national interests. Realism asserts the power and national interests dominate state behavior. A prime example is China Belt and Road Initiative, which extends economic and geopolitical influence through infrastructure investment. States rationally seek power to ensure survival and assert dominance, often focusing on relative gains over collective benefits. Security and military build-up. In realism, security is paramount, leading to military build-ups and alliances. During the Cold War, the United States and Soviet Union engaged in an arms race to deter aggression and maintain a balance of power. This security dilemma illustrates how states prioritize military strength in anarchic and competitive systems. Conflict and war. Realism views international relations as inherently conflictual, with power struggles often leading to war. The Second Gulf War in 2003, spurred by United States concerns over Iraq's weapon of mass destruction, highlight this dynamic. Conflict arises naturally in a system driven by competition for power and survival. Balance of power. The balance of power theory is central to realism, with state acting to prevent dominance by any single actor. NATO formation during the Cold War is a classic example, counterbalancing Soviet power to maintain stability in the region. This mechanism is crucial in maintaining system equilibrium in an anarchic world. Limited role of international institutions. Realists argue that international institutions such as the United Nations often serve the interests of powerful states rather than act as neutral enforcers of cooperation. The UN failure to prevent the United States invasion of Iraq in 2003 underscore this perspective, that such organizations reflect the priorities of dominant power rather than constraining them. Cynicism about morality and ideals. Realism often dismisses morality in favor of pragmatism. For instance, the United States supported authoritarian regimes during the Cold War despite their human rights violations, prioritizing strategic interests. Ethical considerations are secondary in the pursuit of power and survival. Pessimism about cooperation. Realists are skeptical about international cooperation, citing mistrust and concerns over relative gains as significant barriers. The United States' withdrawal from the Paris Climate Agreement in 2017 exemplified this skepticism, reflecting fears of compromising national interests, underscore how relative gains concern undermine long-term cooperative efforts.
Key lesson from realism. One of the foundational theories of international relations, realism focuses on the harsh realities of power, security, and conflict in an anarchic world. The first lesson is the centrality of power in international relations. It's explained, realism emphasizes that power dynamics are the foundation of state behavior and international outcomes. States strive to gain, maintain, or balance power to ensure their survival. For example, the Cold War was shaped by the balance of power between the US and the Soviet Union. Both nations crafted their strategies to prevent the other from gaining an upper hand. The second lesson is the imperative of national security. In an anarchic world, survival is the primary goal of states. This drives them to prioritize security above economic gains, ethical concern, or ideological goals. For example, post 9/11, the US implemented stringent security measures even at the cost of civil liberties and international criticism. The third lesson is the limitation of international cooperation, which means states are inherently cautious about international cooperation. They fear becoming overly dependent on the others or being exploited by stronger states. For example, Brexit illustrates how states may withdraw from international agreements when they perceive them as constraint on sovereignty or security. The fourth lesson is the predictability of state behavior. By viewing states as rational actors, we can predict their action based on their interest in power and security. This allows for more strategic planning in international relations. For example, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, the US anticipated Soviet intention and successfully navigated the situation by leveraging rational decision models. The last lesson is the inevitability of conflict. It means realism asserts that in an anarchic system, competition for power makes conflict inevitable. States must always be prepared for potential conflicts. For example, the arms race during the early 20th century was driven by the understanding that preparedness is the key to survival in a competitive system. Realism provides valuable lessons about power, security, and conflict in international relations. By understanding and applying these insights, policymakers can better navigate the complexities of the global arena.
Advantages of theory. Firstly, practical and realistic view of power dynamic. Realism emphasizes the centrality of power in international relations, providing a pragmatic understanding of how states act to protect their interests in an anarchic system. Next, explain conflict and competition. Realism accounts for the inevitability of conflicts and competition due to the absence of a central authority. Next is predictive value. By focusing on power and self-interest, realism often predicts state behavior more accurately than idealism theory, such as liberalism and constructivism. Next is foundation for policy making. Realism provides a solid framework for designing foreign policy based on a clear assessment of national interests, resources, and the international environment. Next, timeless applicability. The core principles of realism, such as a pursue the national interest and the balance of power, have been relevant throughout history and remain applicable to modern international politics. Next, resistance to idealism. Realism serves as a counterbalance to idealistic theory that emphasizes global corporate, human rights, or international law. It stresses that such as ideal often take a backseat to national interests in practice.
Overemphasis on power in realism suggests that the theory often simplifies international relations by focusing predominantly on military and political power. This narrow perspective neglects the importance of economic, social, and cultural factors that also shape global interactions. As a result, realisms may fail to capture the complexities of modern international relations, where soft power, economic interdependence, and transnational issues play crucial roles. Example under economic factor, the European Union (EU) emerged as a significant actor due to economic integration. The EU has maintained peace among member states not through military power but by fostering mutual economic benefits, which realism struggles to explain fully. Neglect of international cooperation in realism highlights the theories focus on conflict, competition, and power dynamics, often underestimating the role of international institutions, norms, and collective efforts in fostering cooperation among states. Realism's emphasis on an anarchic system and self-help limits its ability to explain why states frequently collaborate to address shared challenges. Example from trade, environmental policy, security, and health illustrate how states often prioritize collaboration over rivalry to address shared challenges, showing the limitations of realism in capturing the complexity of modern international relations. Static and deterministic nature of realism refers to the theory's assumptions that the anarchic international system and the pursuit of power are permanent, unchanged features of global politics. This perspective overlooks the dynamic and evolving nature of international relations, including changes in state behavior, the rise of new actors, and shift in norms and institutions over time. Examples such as the end of Cold War, the role of economic power, and the influence of non-state actors illustrate how international relations are shaped by factors that transcend realism's fixed framework. Ignores non-state actors in realism reflects the theory's state-centric focus, which overlooks the growing influence of entities such as international organizations, transnational corporations, TNCs, and non-governmental organizations, NGOs. These actors increasingly shape global politics, often working across borders to address issues that state cannot tackle alone or influencing international policy in ways realism fails to fully acknowledge. Examples such as the UN's peacekeeping efforts, corporate influence on trade, and NGO advocacy for human rights illustrate the vital role of these actors in global politics. Ethical criticism of realism arises from the theory's focus on power, survival, and self-interest, often sidelining morality and ethics in international relations. Realists argue that states operate in an anarchy system where moral considerations are secondary to ensuring national security and pursuing power. Critics contend that this perspective ignores the role of ethical principle, human rights, and international norms in shaping global politics. Examples like the Cold War's support of authoritarian regimes, the humanitarian impact of sanctions, and the undervaluing of global ethical norms highlight the theory's limitations in addressing the moral dimensions and of international relations. Failure to address globalization in realism reflects the theory limitations in explaining the growing interconnectedness and interdependence of the modern world. Realism focuses on state-centric, power-driven dynamics, often neglecting how globalization transforms international relations by integrating economies, cultures, and societies, and by creating challenges that require cooperative solutions. Examples like the interconnected global supply chain, the cooperative response to transnational challenges, and the rise of non-state actors illustrate how globalization reshapes the international system in ways realism fails to adequately explain. Limited scope on domestic factors in realism reflects the theory's assumptions that states act as unitary, rational actors in the international system, focusing solely on external power dynamics. This perspective overlooks how domestic politics, societal pressures, economic conditions, and leadership ideologies influence foreign policy decisions, leading to an incomplete understanding of state behavior. Examples like the impact of U.S. public opinion on the Vietnam War, Chinese economic motivations, and Indian nationalist policy demonstrates how domestic dynamics significantly shape state behavior in the international system. Summary: Realism, a theory articulated by philosophers like Thucydides, Machiavelli, Hobbes, and Mercantile, emphasizes the significance of power, self-interest, and anarchic international system in which nations are the principal player. Theories include classical realism, which asserts the conflict stems from an inherent desire for power, and structural realism, which emphasizes the absence of the supreme authority and the security issue. Realism has shaped strategies such as deterrence and military alliances, yet it neglects globalization, non-state players, and ethical issues. It provides a pragmatic comprehension of power dynamic, yet its drawbacks include an excessive focus on power, disregard for non-state players, a static viewpoint, and ethical critics.